the network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
A state of control.
This is A State of Control, episode number 6, recorded Monday, August 19th, 2013. The One Ring. This is A State of Control, the podcast about the control and automation segment of the AV industry. Thank you for listening or for downloading or for streaming or whatever it is you're doing. My name is Tim Albright. I'm your host. With us, as always, is Steve Greenblatt. Steve is the chief everything at Control Concepts. He's also the executive producer and the fine, let's just call you, you're the chief muckety-muck of this too. So how are you, sir?
Okay, thanks. I appreciate it.
Steve just got a promotion.
Glad to be so important.
And you got 10, your salary has just tripled.
Excellent.
Yeah. 3 times nothing is nothing. Also with us is, we're going to refer to him as Uncle Richie because we have another Richard on the show. Uncle Richie Fregosa from Fregosa Design. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. Back-to-back days. It's the Uncle Richie social media doubleheader.
Yeah, it's the AV Nation World Tour with Uncle Richie. Next, he'll be up talking about the niceties of Apple with the DIY guys. So
I'll show up, and then it'll be the Uncle Richie three-way.
And it started. All right. Also with us is Chris Neto. He is from AV Helpdesk. How are you, sir? Also, the fine host of the Red Band podcast and the Red Band bloggers and AV Shout. You're busy.
How you doing? Yeah, I'm a busy guy, dude. How's everything?
Good. You do still have a wife and kids, right? Yeah.
Last time I checked in 24 hours ago, I did.
2 weeks ago. Yeah. First timers, so be nice to them.
They're going to get their own bylines on the Red Band next. They'll be blogging them.
You know what? If you want an allowance, you got to blog for daddy. So.
That's it.
First timers, so be nice to them, guys. No hazing. First up is Richard Blackwell. Richard is the president and founder of Linked 2 Software. How are you, sir?
I'm well. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. And last, but certainly not least, his name is Jamie Trader. We've talked about giving him a promotion, but figured that somebody at AMX might scream. So he is he's the director of technology resources at the good old AMX. How are you, sir?
Good afternoon. Doing great. Thanks, Tim.
Absolutely. So this month on the State of Control, we're going to talk about network and enterprise solutions. The fact that the whole AV IT convergence, and I really shied away from using that word, but it is what it is, right? They've been talking about convergence for, good Lord, 10, 12 years. I think in the Infocom of 2000 or 2001, they had a giant banner that said convergence, and that was 13 years ago. So this has been coming for a long time, ever since the very first control manufacturer put an Ethernet drop or even an Ethernet possibility as an add-on. So we've been talking about this for quite a long time in the industry. I don't think that we've gotten, really smart guys like this together to talk about it. So Steve, we'll kick it off with you on this. When it comes to providing connectivity for not just control systems, but all parts of the AV systems, this is not exactly an added feature anymore. This is something where if you're not doing it, you're being left behind.
That is true. Ethernet is what started off as just being web control and just a way of being able to maybe have an additional part to your system has now become infrastructure, and devices without Ethernet ports really are behind the times. And so I think it's time for us to start thinking a little differently, and it's very possible down the road that we'll be using the network for just about everything, and there'll be a lot more software solutions and a lot less hardware solutions.
Okay, so talk about that for a second, though, because we've been talking about the whole convergence thing. I was always under the impression that it was hardware driven. So it's being software driven now.
Well, if the one of the big benefits of using the network and Ethernet is to be able to do remote diagnostics, to be able to do remote monitoring, and also when you think about it now, the service that we're using now, Skype, is an alternative to video conferencing, and we're seeing that a lot more in systems. So what was these proprietary hardware dedicated pieces now is we're seeing the replacement by software and cloud-based services.
All right, so Uncle Richie, this will take me a bit. You and I have talked before on a couple different shows about remotely monitoring systems and looking at it from the far end. Is this one of those things, whether it's a service contract or it's something that's built into the cost of the system, where this is not anymore, just like not having an Ethernet connection is a possibility or even an option for manufacturers. When it comes to integrators, you have to have some sort of serviceable or service contract in place for your clients, whether they're residential or the commercial.
Yeah, I think this is another one of those conversations where this isn't necessarily something revolutionary. It's evolutionary. It's keeping up with the way that the rest of the market outside of AV is going. No longer do you have these huge hardware investments that are being put into the enterprise necessarily. They're scaling to software solutions because they're easier to deploy and maintain and everything else. And we're seeing that same shift over on our side. And the beauty of that is, again, the less physical parts that you're dealing with, the more nimble that you can be, the more that you can support it and you can scale and grow. What that means is that from an AV standpoint, it's completely changing the view of how we used to approach things. A service call used to mean a truck roll. There was a relay that went. And again, when there was an IR control device or a relay control device or a motor or any of the other mechanical interfaces that we used to have, what would wind up happening is that it would still most of the time require some form of truck roll, a technician, somebody who's hands-on. Because more of the devices that we're dealing with, we were just talking about streaming media. We're talking about video and audio being potentially sent over their transport layers over the networking. We're not dealing with physical items as much anymore. We're dealing with data. So it is just that natural evolution that if our content that we're having to control and get from point A to point B is data-based, then our control approach also should be data-based, which is diagnostic, implementation, monitoring, and hopefully being proactive and spotting solutions before it. So, it's kind of when you used to spend your $19.99 to get your AOL account. What were you buying, right? You were buying this giant server farm somewhere. And you were dealing with proprietary solutions that they were kicking out to you. AV, I've always felt, like I said, is about 20 years behind that curve. We've gotten away from these large, expensive physical items, and like Steve was saying, moving into software-based solutions, moving into something that is a little bit more service contracts. You have to focus on being a software developer as opposed to a product seller. And I think that's where, especially in our segment of the industry, more and more companies are seeing that success, which is coming in and saying, we're going to go ahead and maintain the health of this system without having to have somebody there the entire time, physically walking around and checking things. We don't need to do that anymore. With high-speed internet, just for that reason alone, if you've got 5 different facilities, we don't have to have 5 people out there. So we're not necessarily having to bill you for that. Instead, we can go ahead and offer our monthly, our quarterly, our yearly fee to keep everything going. And in those small instances where something might be a problem, then we can go ahead and deploy a truck, roll, and move. And it's just the way that we're moving. I mean, it's not even, is it a good idea? It's just, this is the direction that you need to go, or you will no longer be a player in your respective industry.
You'll no longer be viable.
Yeah.
Richard Blackwell, when it comes to this is, I hate using convergence and I hate using paradigm because, first of all, they're overused words, but it seems the most appropriate terms for this. This is a paradigm shift when it comes to people, the people who make up the pro AV and make up commercial AV and residential AV. This is a paradigm shift for them because they have to change how they think, don't they, when they start developing and designing systems?
It is. So we began the convergence some years back, and that's probably, as you said, just a poorly used word. Really, the convergence happened at the moment that the Ethernet port arrived on the hardware. And then it became a matter of adoption. Who's going to use it, and what can you use it for? As far as the people, the folks that are out there, the integrators, installers, large campus environment, they've always had a need to monitor equipment in the field, but really their needs were very different, and so how they were looking at this was really slow to take place. And the primary separation is, let's take a campus environment, whether it's a corporate campus or an educational campus. Those folks are interested in, is the classroom occupied? How often is it occupied? How many people do we have in it? And what equipment is being used? On the other side of the fence, there's an integrator that owns that classroom as far as the equipment goes and the warranties and the services associated with it. They really don't care how often the room is occupied. That's of no interest to them at all. Their interest is in, did a projector bulb fail? And do we know about it? And did we expect it? Or has a DSP taken a lightning hit, or a VTC system that can't connect to another classroom? They're more concerned about the equipment side, which is not so important to the campus side of the environment. So when you look at both sides of this, there is a different perspective. So yes, they're both having these shifts, and it's very slow. And I'd have to say that on the integration side of this, it continues to be slow. So when we say monitoring, hey, you should be monitoring your gear in the field because that means that you can add additional service revenue. It means that, as mentioned before by Uncle Rich there, that you don't have to roll a truck if you can diagnose a problem remotely and either retrain the customer, which happens more often than not, and or determine that there was some embedded bug that no one found before and make a tweak. And then the third scenario is that equipment has failed. And so you knew about that equipment perhaps before the customer did, and you've got a truck rolling. So that boardroom meeting that was scheduled for 9 a.m. Monday morning, and the big storm came through Friday afternoon, you knew right away the equipment failed, and you've got a truck with new stuff in it. And now you're the hero showing up with equipment replacements instead of the villain because this stuff broke.
Mm-hmm. Well, that assumes an awful lot of integration, not to use another word, but a lot of connectivity between you and the client on the long term, doesn't it? Because I mean, here's the thing: there are some integrators that once they hand the keys over to the system, they don't hear from those clients ever again. Right. And unfortunately, in today's business world, as more and more equipment becomes a commodity, and you're not really making profits on those LCD screens that are being installed or projectors. You're making profit on your time on site, on your installation time, a few points here and there on equipment. But the real money is to be made in the service revenue afterwards. And that says, hey, we promise that we're going to build an extra good system for you, and we're going to stand behind it for the first year. But if you want 24-hour turnaround, perhaps, then we can add that to you as well.
And I remember being an integrator years ago, and when we had 24-hour policies that came across my desk, I always got butterflies and went, oh gosh, it's a crapshoot here. Will we actually be able to meet this or not? And at that time, Ethernet was just coming around, and how do we connect to these things?
Yeah.
The real challenge is that integrators in the field, the manufacturers have stepped up. They've put the equipment, added the Ethernet connections, and added the remote connection capabilities to the products. But the integrators are not yet embracing the monitoring and remote management capabilities, and it's free money. So I see it being slow on that side. And so, yes, the adoption, the paradigm shift is not happening on the integration side as quickly as it is on the campus side.
Well, and Chris, I know from AV Helpdesk, you can talk about this because you used to be, you still are. You're a site tech as well as being a designer and a consultant. I mean, AV Helpdesk is, you are most of the time you're on site with various clients. So talk about that with, how would you say, integrators, I guess, even breach that subject?
Well, it's tough to say. Well, actually, it's not tough to say. It's very easy to put out there. As a former site guy, I wanted remote monitoring that everybody's talking about. It's easier said than done or implemented in the case of a technology manager. You want it there for the diagnostics and for the tools to see that, like Richard said, that a DSP is kicked the bucket or that the system needs to be rebooted and stuff like that. There is a need for us to know that as a site person, that the room is being occupied, because we were generating metrics off that as well. Mm-hmm. We were trying to push at a couple, at one site that I was working at for a bunch of years, we were trying to implement room monitoring as a way to build up a case for room modifications. If a room is being used, if it's a heavily used type room, like video conference room, an integrated video conference and presentation, something that does double duty, we want to get those, capture those metrics. What is it being used most for? Because then that would help us plan our budgets out for the next year and so on and so forth. So for the on-site guys, yes, this was the whole integration part of it and the remote management metrics was very important for us. But there's the piece that that the remote management brings to it, which is generating tickets. Knowing that, hey, listen, it's time for your for a monthly maintenance in the room. Mm-hmm. Go double check these things. It worked as a reminder system and a way to deploy technicians. The site technicians, at least that I worked with, we basically looked at ourselves as our own little company within a company. We had to have a stock of stuff. We had to have inventory of parts to do repairs and stuff like that. What those tools all did combined together was give us like that central hub where we knew this room is used a lot, this one has to be priority, this is this type of room, this is the type of processor that's there, and we basically used it as a log to keep information on every room that's in the campus or the corporate world. So it was, I can't say enough good things about it, but it's not for every company. Getting them to understand remote management, getting them to put it on their networks is still a very, very challenging conversation with internal IT departments.
Jamie, when it comes to the manufacturer standpoint, how does the network, how does the cloud, again, another term I don't like using, how does this whole network thing change how the manufacturers tackle AV? I mean, does it fundamentally switch, or is it one of these things where it's just something we can throw on?
I think it's an interesting question because you look at there's basically four major trends that we monitor pretty closely, and cloud and virtualization is definitely one of those market trends. And when you look at it, it's extremely obvious where collaboration is headed and where document sharing is headed. It is this migration towards cloud-based access to material. And, it basically boils down to a comment that Rich made earlier, Uncle Richie, in discussing content being king. If you look at some of the statistics, I think it's Cisco's internet forecast from 2012 to 2017. They've got a trajectory for a threefold increase in internet traffic between now and 2017, looking at 1.4 zettabytes of internet traffic per year. And right now we're sitting at a quarter of all that internet traffic is from non-PC devices. By 2017, they're predicting that to be up to nearly 50%. So the impact of cloud means that the entire dynamic of the meeting space, of the classroom space, is 100% changing in front of us. If there's all this video out there and everything is being served and stored from the cloud, it changes the responsibility of the role of what gear has inside all these classrooms and meeting spaces. The gear is no longer about what hard devices actually sit physically in the room, but it's what's the quickest way to access that cloud that's out there. So it definitely makes us think about what is the role of the control system, and what do we need to do to give people quicker, more immediate access to their content. At the end of the day, that's all we're really doing in the first place, was selling systems that enabled people to walk into a room and collaborate with one another, to share their information with one another, to talk with one another. All this hardware that we pushed in, from all of us different manufacturers, was really just to facilitate collaboration. Now, if I can walk into a room and just provide connectivity for this ubiquitous mobile computing that's out there, it means that really all I need is some point of connectivity that can adapt to whatever connects in, and then make sure that that room itself provides the quickest, most immediate way to virtualize that space to that meeting host or that teacher or whoever's walking into the space, make it their room upon walking into that space. So it absolutely has a huge impact. Some of the the earlier discussion, as far as your favorite word, convergence.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the original fantasy or a lot of the origin of this phrase convergence in our network really did relate to asset management and scheduling management. But that's because content was still a physical manifestation of people and humans in this space, and bringing in their papers and bringing in, dedicated media into this space. And so really the only role of that Ethernet jack on the hardware was to provide management of those devices. But now there should be less and less devices in the room, which means that convergence is really about content.
So you guys, from a manufacturer standpoint, are not just things to connect to the cloud, but you're also things to push things to the cloud and to gather things from the cloud, and to so you have the asset management part also, but you've also got the ability to take content from the cloud, whether that's from an Amazon or a YouTube or a Hulu or what have you. But also, broadcast out, I guess is the best way to put it, the state of certain things, and the make sure that things are still connected, because people do use, the ACNEC, are you still there type things with projectors and such, to make sure for a security standpoint. So you guys are, you're kind of the hub, which is kind of a neat place to be.
Right. Yeah, it's neat and it's scary. There's a lot of focus that has to go into delivering the right solution there, and every manufacturer's coming to market right now with their own version of accessing that cloud content and what type of user experience that they want to provide that differentiates themselves from every other manufacturer. We just sit there and keep our eye on a couple of trends. One being video being everywhere, one being mobile computing, one being the cloud, and then finally green and sustainability trends. So the green and sustainability trends, you look at the difference between 2011 and 2012, the corporations that have implemented some kind of green practice between 11 and 12 was almost a doubling factor. And wow. I think that, the more that the more that these AV systems provide quicker, cleaner, more efficient access to that cloud content, the more that people will finally accept these AV systems as being core to the network because they see them as core network delivery vehicles. And now, then the minute that there's greater acceptance to these appliances being on the network, kind of to Chris's point about not everyone's down with that yet, not everyone's accepting of it. But once they see that these devices actually are network endpoint means of gaining access to your material, now it's on the network because they want their content. Now with it being on the network, now there will be a greater adoption of the asset management and the resource management and the reporting and the metrics and all the good stuff that comes with that original offering in the first place,
Yeah, it's where we were almost gone back to the beginning
That's right.
when it comes to that. You are listening to State of Control. That gentleman right there is Jamie Trader from AMX. Also with us is Richard Blackwell from Linked to Software, Uncle Richie Fregosa from Fregosa Design, Chris Neto from AV Helpdesk, and Mr. Steve Greenblatt from Control Concepts. Steve, this is an awful lot to take in, and if I'm an old school programmer, I'm an old school audio-visual guy, audio-video guy. I hooked up my first barcode to an IBM ThinkPad back in 1991. How am I going to get involved in this? And I don't mean from a standpoint of let's jump in and let's become ace programmers, but how do I stay abreast, I guess is the best way to put this, because just like the IT industry and Rich is to Uncle Richie's point, we are on a track, on a trajectory similar to the IT industry. How do existing AV professionals stay up to date with this stuff?
Well, it is kind of scary and intimidating, and I can't speak for all the different roles within the industry, but I know from a programmer standpoint, we've had exposure to this for many years. So I would say that we have an advantage, and when it first started to come upon us, it was based on the control system, and therefore it was something that we needed to know because we needed to be able to have those conversations and be able to understand what it took to get a system on the network and what it took to maybe program or set up the system for remote access. Over the years, between continuing education within the industry, learning as we go, and just learning because your feet are to the fire, you really get on board pretty quickly. And the key, though, what I found and what I think a lot of others have found is that you need to be able to talk to the IT professionals, because if they're going to hit you right off the bat with terminology and asking you questions and try to throw you off your game to see if you're legitimate or not. And if you can't have that conversation, they're going to discount you, and it's going to be a tough road. It's important to be able to feel like you can be eye to eye with them.
Does that take something like getting a certain either Cisco certification or some sort of network certification, or just reading up on it?
Well, I'm sure it helps, but it isn't a requirement. There's enough education within our industry, either given by the manufacturers, and many of them do. And what's really nice is that if you go to manufacturer training, maybe 50% of what you hear is going to be consistent. So it really starts to gel, and then you start to get those aha moments and realize that, hey, I'm used to this now, and I kind of get it, and it is this very similar, even though you might have different types of devices. But between that and Infocom and CEDIA, and there's a lot of opportunity to learn, and of course, it's helpful to be able to know somebody within IT, so that when you have that oddball question, or you really have to ask them, well, what does this really mean to me? It's important to have that go-to person to know.
Uncle Richie, from a control programmer standpoint, walk me through taking a grand view of this, right? Because years ago, when it was just connecting to the internet and making sure that you could remotely monitor, that was one thing. But the whole smart building thing has been floating around for a couple of years. Crestron has integrated by design, all this jazz. Last year at the InfoComm 100, that was the talk, was the smart building. So when it comes to a programmer's job, you have kind of your scope has broadened, hasn't it?
Yeah. The programmer, I think, a dedicated systems programmer, whether a CSP, whether an ACE, if they're a third party or if they're in the employ of the dealer, a big thing that I've been pushing is the fact that in our industry, the focus has to be more on collaboration than competition. There's just so much out there that we have to deal with now. Building control is one facet. I was thinking earlier that today, 20 years ago, the VCR and the slide deck has now become today's digital signage and then now the mobile device. I mean, we've transitioned into devices that we don't even necessarily control anymore. Mm-hmm. Building management comes along that same way, where you're not going to be necessarily the HVAC contractor. You're not necessarily going to be the security and life safety systems contractor. You're not going to be the elevator operator. There's all of these disparate fields now that, from a control system standpoint, originally when we started out, we were in the classroom or in the boardroom dealing with some very specific functions. The presentation of media. You were the AV guy, the old AV cart guy. And now as these connected systems have come across, like Steve was talking about, we don't necessarily need to know everything about the systems that we're controlling, but at the very least, we need to be allied with the people that do. And that's become a bigger part of the puzzle, which is, how are you going to be able to exchange information? And that's become the commodity now. Not necessarily, is this backnet controller going to be compatible with my control system, and are the security layers that I've got within the network on this campus going to be compatible? You don't necessarily need to hire somebody in-house for that knowledge, but you better have the inroads to at least be able to communicate with these people and ally and team with them appropriately. And that's from even a control systems programmer, those are the things that you should be focusing on, which is where can you focus on your asset allocation rather than how about this X piece of code that we're dealing with. It's kind of a head scratcher right now. Because it's forcing people who aren't necessarily the most social to begin with.
Well, yeah. What are you saying, Uncle Richie? That programmers aren't,
you don't find a lot of frustrated sculptors or aspiring game show hosts who decide to be programmers. There's some very specific traits sometimes when you decide to get into the ones and zeros side of the business, and it is it's a matter of again learn. You can't just be a coder anymore. You just can't. You can't just walk in and say, I've got this done, give me the piece of code and away we go. I think that companies that is their focus from a business standpoint, there's too many other options available to grow. And I think that with our reach as control systems programmers expanding, there needs to be the focus on expanding that skill set, which is, again, you're not going to be able to do everything at once. So partnering with your manufacturers, partnering with your vendors, partnering with, the network guy, the life safety guys and everything else. And it's to me, that's kind of the bigger picture than, okay, well, now we're going to go ahead and deal with, the nuts and bolts of BACnet. Well, as more and more of these protocols are trying to find, again, we're trying to follow the IT industry, mm-hmm. which is we're trying to consolidate. At some point, we will find that more and more of these devices are just going to say, this whole proprietary idea really doesn't make a whole lot of sense when we've got an existing data framework that makes life a whole lot easier for us. And what's happening is that there's, dyed-in-the-wool vendors who are holding on to the very last bit until they have to switch over because they see it as a loss of their competitive advantage. Same thing with control systems programmers. Your competitive advantage is going to change very quickly within the next few years. And part of it is focusing less on the actual detail of what you're controlling and more about how do you get everybody playing along nicely. I mean, you're a matchmaker as a control systems programmer. That's the way that I've always viewed it.
You're a matchmaker. I won't sing the song for you. So, Jamie, as from a manufacturer standpoint, how do you get both the integrators and the control programmers as well as your end users, the people who are, as Richard said, as Uncle Richie said, dyed in the wool? They're dedicated to you. How do you get them all on the same page when it comes to, this whole, convergence? Again, I hate using it, but this whole convergence thing.
And that's the $1 million question, right?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I think that what we've tried to accomplish over here, kind of our perspective, is to get everybody on the same page, is to literally bring people into the same room and share in the same dialogue of what the actual client objectives are. There seems to be, I'd say, probably at least a good decade delta in people kind of losing focus on what end users are actually trying to accomplish on a day-to-day basis. And we've kind of turned into an industry of art projects. And I think that's the biggest challenge for control system programmers, and some of the misalignment between the programming entity of the integrator channel, the end user, and the manufacturer, is that we look at each individual space as a function of an art project, something for us to sit down and build and get just perfect, and then we wipe our hands and we go, man, this is beautiful. And really what the end user community is really begging for is basically just standardized approach to all of their meeting spaces and classrooms. And so it's a little bit of a dialogue to realign everybody back together and get folks focused back on the objective of just human collaboration. And I think once that dialogue begins of saying, what is it you're trying to accomplish when you and 15 colleagues walk into this room, it kind of removes some of the I would say the variances in opinion of what needs to happen inside that space. Yeah. And once you remove those variances of opinion, then you get a lot more alignment. You look at, we had AMX kind of, we've done 30 years of professional services, and a number I like to throw out is we went back and looked over thousands and thousands and thousands of projects that we had delivered on as in our own professional services team. And, over all that multitude of projects, we really found that all of those being unique, quote unquote, I'm throwing up the air quotation marks in case you couldn't hear that over the Skype call. All of those being unique instances, we really distilled it down to, we had been delivering 13 of the same room types. Some of them are called classrooms, some of them are called meeting spaces, some of them are called homes. But at the end of the day, 13 room types is what we've been delivering over and over and over again. And when you just kind of, now that's obviously there's a lot of fringe and outlier projects out there. Probably about 15% of those are outlier projects. But when 85% of everything you've been doing for same types of rooms, it really makes you stop and think, what are we doing in this space here? So I really think that the real challenge and the real growth that the programming community is going to see and integrators are going to see is when we remove the focus from the individual space and we look at how do we deliver an entire building of consistent experiences across all those spaces. Yeah, there might not be as much artwork in each individual room. There might not be as much custom individualization per room. But once we get all of the usability and that experience 100% the same, that allows us to grow our services model into focusing on communication, enterprise communication. How do we get people's messages across the enterprise, the campus, across the globe? And that's where the programming effort really gets meaty and really gets challenging and really gets rewarding.
And that's a really good point, is the fact that you've got all of these guys that the possibility is there, right? The chance is there. And we're going to take this to Chris and to Richard. Chris, I don't think that there's much argument that there is the opportunity. I guess the best way to ask this then is, are the integrators in the AV industry, are they poised to take advantage of that?
That's assuming that the AV integrators have, the ability. Well, the ability they have, don't get me wrong. They have the right contacts at corporate offices or campus locations to get a seat at that table. And we've talked about this 100 times.
Yeah.
The only way that AV is going to be able to help in this space is if they get a seat at the big boy table as opposed to the kiddie table. I mean, for lack of a better analogy, as an industry, we are the best choice, or the ones that are ready to take HVAC, to take security, and to take conference rooms, and to take an entire integrated building and put it on a communication platform. We can talk to their devices. We know how to do it. And on top of it, we can make it look good, which is what that's our strong suit. We can come up with a nice GUI. We can come up with a way to present this. Right now, you can't go to an HVAC manufacturer and say, do you have a solution that'll handle all this? No, we're the only ones that can go in and talk to their hardware right now and probably do it well, except we got to get past the stigma that we're still pushing around, TVs and VCRs in a lot of people's minds. And we've had this discussion numerous times. What are we doing as an industry to show that? Yes, manufacturers such as AMX and Crestron and Extron are out there bringing solutions to the table. But what are we, the foot soldiers, doing to take that to the customers? How are we presenting this? Because to them, and like the facilities people that I work with, we're still the guys that still can't get, a projector to turn on simultaneously and drop a screen in a lot of people's eyes. You know what I'm saying? And all that took was one hiccup. The trust is not there on our part. So we're correcting that. We're approaching the standards. We're doing all the things. We're trying to make it right. But in order for this to really take forward, integrators have to make a concise, a push themselves to go in and talk about the bigger program. They have to find the contacts to sit everybody down at a table and say, this is what we can do. They're not just selling to the IT guy or to the admin or the CEO who needs a conference room. The bigger picture always has to be kept in mind. Before I was talking about, how difficult it is to put remote management on a network and talking to the IT people. That's me just talking to the IT people.
Yeah.
Imagine me talking to HVAC about, hey, I got this program, that can do this, that, and the other thing. Next thing, I look like I'm walking around with a trench coat trying to sell product to people. There's got to be a better way, and there's got to be a more of like an industry effort as opposed to. I think that's just my take.
Well, and Richard, we'll bring this to you then as we wrap up here. Chris makes a good point. I mean, we've been talking about getting this stuff on the network, and so you're obviously going to talk with the IT department. You start talking about HVAC and lighting and stuff like that. You're involving operations, facilities, all sorts of people. So, Richard, you have a seat at the table now, as Chris put it, at the big boy, at the adult table. Walk me through how you're going to present to all these folks. Hey, look, we are the proper industry. We're the guys that will make all of you guys talk together and understand each other.
So, right, there's always been the desire for the one ring to rule them all. That's a great vision, and I believe that every industry seeks that in one way or the other. And the AV industry is certainly going in that direction as well. And when we talk about cloud computing, there's a lot of cloud things going on, but really it's cloud stuff that everyone's using. There's not so many cloud things happening that are specific to AV. I'm sure there are folks out there that are like us and what we're doing, and we're working crazy around here every day adding automation to the cloud. And so I believe that as we move towards the future, one of the things that hasn't been mentioned in the conversation yet today was, what about the eventual move of the software from the control system out to the cloud? And does that make sense? And so what we anticipate is that there will be a simple migration initially. And so some of the things that folks like us are doing, and that is, hey, we'll trigger relay, send serial commands, trigger IR commands, and all of that from the cloud. So you never needed a programmer on site. Not that you would go without them always, or that you would change from the need to have the automation gear on site. But what if you could go to simple systems today that required no programmer at all, and someone from a cloud application has the ability to simply say, hey, when this event happens, I would like to close that relay or open that relay or send this command. That's where the AV side of all the cloud movement will be taking place. And so when we look at what's going to happen to the programmers, what's going to happen to the support guys, programmers won't change. There's always going to be the outlier projects that are always going to be custom.
Yeah.
But I believe we'll move in the direction of, in full circle, as the internet has brought us, we'll move away from coding at the control system to the control system simply being the eyes, ears, and fingers, and the automation being on the cloud. And that scares some people, but there was a time when folks said that, well, would you really want to rely on the internet to get your email? Well,
you have to.
Yeah, we have no choice now. And control system programming will move in that direction as well. At least we hope so, because that's a lot of our effort, and what we're doing from the cloud is to enable simple systems to be managed from the cloud. And so systems like Jamie's won't change in anything that they're doing, but on the side of control, that will move. And from Christopher's side, there may be a day not too far out from now where, sitting in the office, the customer says, well, we really wanted that light to come on instead of off when this event happens. And one of Chris's staff goes over to an interface in the office at the support desk and just changes a configuration. And the control system operation changes right there on the spot. And no one needed to go in the field, and no one needed to bring on a programmer that was already overloaded and living off of caffeine to begin with. So that's the changes that I see, and that's the real cloud side of this that we will eventually all be seeing, and it'll affect everyone.
Well, and I couldn't agree with you more there. That's one of the things that, one of the approaches that you've probably heard us in the marketplace is looking at the controller that sits in the room as being nothing more than really a gateway, and the controlling, the programming that's actually occurring is the basically a cloud-based configuration of how those gateways interact. So sure, there's some logical processing that occurs inside that quote-unquote gateway, but it's all actively being managed. Tim could open up his cloud portal, and he could choose to make some quick and easy changes to how his room is automated. And effectively what he's doing is he's changing the behavior of something specific and unique to him. But instead of the processing being stored in the cloud is just acting as a configuration portal for someone to be able to go in and make a quick, easy change. But I think you're dead on accurate.
Wow.
There's one other thing though, and there, to me, I'm still keeping my on-site, support person or tech hat on. There's a 900-pound gorilla sitting off in the corner of this conversation, which is the way that things are handled on site, whether it's corporate or campus-wise. What we're talking about is great. Being able to change a lighting configuration and do it on the fly, that's awesome. That's if there's a direct line to me. The way things are working is that there is help desk and trouble tickets and remedy and this, that, and the other thing. By the time that gets to me, that could be a little late. And what scares me about, the more on the IT side that we go, and Tim, you support a campus,
yeah.
You work on site, a trouble ticket system currently, deployed at your campus or a company or whatever is not going to give that instant gratification to anybody. And that's sort of like the fear as an on-site support person is, all right, somebody gives me, the way it's supposed to work. Somebody calls from a conference room, hey, my control panel's locked up. I need help. Well, if that goes through the normal process, that person has to pick up the phone, dial the help desk. The help desk then types up the email, confirms all this stuff. Now 10 minutes have gone by. By the time that ticket goes out, reaches a technician, gets onto a smartphone, that's 15 minutes. In the world of support, IT can resolve an issue. They get a trouble ticket, they have 24 hours to respond, typically, in most situations. In the world of AV, we got about 5 minutes. and that's no lie. I mean, we laugh about it, but 5 minutes, if you're on a half-hour video call and the picture goes out for 5 minutes, by the time the technician gets there, it's 15 minutes into the call. Got 15 minutes to do a 30-minute call, you're done. It's over. Kiss it goodbye, reboot, and try to figure out a way to do it another time. So my whole fear, I understand we're all talking about IT convergence, AV convergence, is that help desk piece to it, that IT mentality of we'll put in a trouble ticket, we'll send it in, do it all automatically on a computer. We are hands-on as IT people, not IT people, excuse me, as
AV people.
Yeah, these room systems, these monitoring systems do not replace. Last time I checked, none of these products can change a light bulb, or a projector bulb, or a light bulb for that matter. But that's the underlying fear for somebody who's on site is how is this going to address? And I think that the systems also have to bring that to play. If you're going to do this sort of stuff, you got to find a better way. The way it's currently done with IT may be all great and all for the average IT person who's been doing it for 5-10 years. But if we're going to develop something, and if we're going to put out a product, we got to find a way to circumvent some of that stuff to make it faster and to make it more immediate, because we are living in an instant gratification society when it comes to technology. If it's not now, you're done. So.
Well, Chris, I'd even argue and maybe I'm agreeing with you, maybe I'm coming about it the other way, but I think the entire conversation of AV systems as a function of some kind of cloud delivery vehicle, I think it does nothing but strengthen your role and enhance your role, because I'm looking at it from you're absolutely 100% correct. Nothing matters unless there's somebody there with actually hands-on equipment to actually resolve whatever logistical issues are right there on site. I look at it from this way: if you've got a team of 5 people, the ability to be able to manage code configurations, device configurations, all those things from a cloud, that just, coming from a background of field work, it's knowing that you don't have to go in and wonder if you're working with the right software, if you're working with the right version of a configuration file. You just access the cloud, and when you need to make a change to something, you're popping right in. Even though you may be physically in the room resolving a physical issue, that cloud enablement actually keeps you in touch with the most current recent thing that maybe one of your other technicians has helped with. So I think it's a great companion. I think it's an enhancement to your role and the value you bring.
It's definitely a early warning system, if you want to. I look at it that way. It's definitely to be used, and its proper use right off the bat is as an early warning system. If something's up, something's wrong, be proactive as opposed to reactive. And that's what everybody strives for when you're doing these on-site support models, is to be more proactive so you reduce your reactive response. But, I agree. It is definitely a tool in an arsenal that is absolutely necessary. It should be in there with your, spare HDMI and your crimpers. And it's sort of part of your tool bag, and it's necessary for everybody to understand that. It's just that how the business is run and how IT currently runs things, they're going to go back to the old warhorse when it comes to, well, this is how we've always done it. This is how calls get logged. This is how trouble tickets are generated. That process doesn't exactly jive with what we're trying to do, which is more proactive, more quick action as opposed to the way things are currently done. But I said that's just me, the on-site guy who's been through it and has seen a trouble ticket come in, and it's already the conference is over when I see it. So
well,
that's
this
sort of, yeah.
I mean, this potentially, and I mean, the bigger point that this brings up is that it is going to require integrators to look very closely at their business model, where potentially instead of being, like Chris was saying, is that, he's a specialist. He's the guy who knows everything about everything. When that call comes in, he's the top gun that comes in. Companies may have to change their approach if they're using this proactive, holistic, diagnostic, whatever you want to call it, version of saying, this ties in directly, Tim, to what we were talking about, but the service contracts and about the layers of response that you need to provide for somebody, or somebody chooses from that a la carte menu of, here's our 24-hour response, here's our 2-hour response, here's our on-site guy. And by the way, it might not even be known to them from the facility standpoint, but the on-site person is not necessarily your top-tier person. So rather than trying to hopefully find 10, 15 top-tier guys and deploy them, if you've got multiple sites all over the place, you potentially have your on-site person who is being paid for by the service contract, who isn't necessarily the top-tier person, who is there for the projector bulb went out, this went out, and they are just there to be facilitators for the top-tier person who's back at the home office, who's monitoring, sitting at the help desk, monitoring 15, 20 systems. I mean, it's almost like it's almost like air traffic control for control systems. Is that you've got a frontline person who is not necessarily your senior person, and then you've got your senior people who aren't necessarily your field people anymore. And that's an interesting one to consider, because it is almost in stark contrast to the way we've been doing it. It's that, there's only so many bodies to go around. And at that point, and if you look at a lot of times how IT gets deployed, the projects that I'm involved in, normally the first line of defense isn't necessarily the person who's the database architect or somebody who is, the director of IT. It's an associate. An associate comes and goes, oh, yeah, that switch is broke. Pulls it out of their bag, swaps it in. Whoever happens to be at the home office goes ahead and steps them to the configuration, or it comes pre-configured. And I think that's what some of the others were talking about, which is we are, by the cloud, I kind of view it as it's not necessarily distributed logic. You're not hosting, 15 AMX and Crestron processors sitting in a rack over in your office. Those are still local, but the mind share and the technical and the programming firepower isn't necessarily an on-site presence anymore. That's something that can be deployed a little bit more effectively and efficiently, and if you can scale it appropriately, you can charge for it appropriately, because you're amortizing it over the cost of several projects, as opposed to, I think we were talking about that 15% of one-offs. You might still have that one-off project that requires some heavy hitters in the field, but IT's gone the same route. Again, this is us catching up to how everybody else is doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, just real quick before we sign off here, Steve, where are we going with this? What is the end game? Is the end game something that Richard kind of said, Uncle Richie said isn't happening yet, which is virtualized processors? Is that where we're headed, or is it just kind of where all of us will be able to integrate and see everything else? Obviously, if we have access to it, we have the clearance to see it, where everything is going to be on the cloud.
It's an interesting question, and I think that the cloud and this conversation presents an eye opener for, I think, a lot of people. And of course, with a biased opinion, I'd have to say that a programmer's role that is traditionally now is going to change, but I think it's going to change for the better. I think that they're that person that does know how everything goes together and how everything works and the ins and outs. And I think that they're almost the poised to be the quarterback and the one that can help to solve those problems and understands all of the communication and has the network savvy and knows how all of the devices work. I mean, they're not going to be the person who's going to go in and be the hands-on that's going to fix the problem, but they may be the lead person who's going to be able to diagnose it and manage these systems. I think one of the things that came up in this conversation is the idea of having fixing or configuring systems kind of on the fly. It presents a management issue, because you can't have rooms working differently and know how they're supposed to work. So somebody needs to be in charge.
I like the analogy. For the first time in their lives, programmers will be referred to as quarterbacks. So, so we've beaten up on programmers an awful lot. They're antisocial. They live off Mountain Dew, and they're not exactly very athletic. So, all right, guys.
60 to 80%, Tim. What? Move to the cloud.
Yeah, we go.
60 to 80%.
60 to 80%. Okay. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. We try to keep these for about an hour, and we're pushing right up against that. So, with us has been that gentleman right there is Richard Blackwell. He's from Linked to Software. He's the president and founder. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Thank you.
How can people get a hold of you or get a hold of Linked to?
Linked to Software, LINKED, the digit 2 software.com.
Very good. Also with us is Jamie Trader. Jamie is the Director of Technical Resources for AMX. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. And how can people get a hold of you or get a hold of AMX?
Hit us on the website, Facebook, Twitter, Jamie Trader. Also, you reach out to us through our rejuvenated VIP partner program. We've retooled it to really, extend the role and value of our best programmers out there. So if you hit amx.com and go to our resources, you'll find information there, and you'll find folks like Steve, and we're working with Steve and others in our program to really bring them into the fold, make them part of our services and product teams, and really look at growing their value to be a better part of the overall campus and enterprise communication goals that you have for your network.
Very good. And that's at AMX's website, too, the VIP?
Right.
Okay. Also with us is Chris Neto. Chris has 15 jobs, so we'll go down the list here. He works for AV Helpdesk. He also has a website called AV Shout, and the blogs are the Red Band bloggers, and he also has a podcast called the Red Band Radio. So thank you, sir.
Hey, thank you, man. It was a fun time.
And where can people find you or AV Helpdesk or any of those?
You can find AV Helpdesk at avhelpdesk.com. You can find me on just about every social media platform, unfortunately. But probably the best way is on Twitter at Chris Neto, at Chris_Neto on Twitter, and I see there quite often. But that's it, man. Thanks, Tim.
Right, absolutely, thank you. Uncle Richie, we've been spending way too much time together, but how can people get a hold of you, sir?
Let's see, the Twitter at @Fregosa. You can find me at my website at fregosadesign.com. And also, if you want to see me in person, come to CEDIA Expo 2013, and you can actually get on the show floor for free if you register using my code CT2, Charlie Tango 2, where I'll be part of the CEDIA Tweeps social media team at CEDIA again this year, and also part of the CE Pro blog mob. So look for me there, too, on cepro.com.
Yes, and that's in Denver this year, right?
That is, end of September. So good times.
Yeah. All right, last but not least, our fearless leader for this podcast, Steve Greenblatt from Control Concepts. How can people get a hold of you or Control Concepts, sir?
You could reach me on the various social media platforms at Steve Greenblatt. I just started playing with Google Plus after listening to AVNation podcasts. Yeah, so that's been fun.
That makes 3 people. Sorry.
And we all know each other.
Well, yeah, as long as we're all together, that's all that matters. And I will be joining Uncle Richie at CEDIA. I look forward to having a good time.
Yeah, very good. And Control Concepts, the website and everything?
Is controlconcepts.net. Thank you.
That's very helpful. Controlconcepts.net. My name is Tim Albright. Go to the website. It's the best thing I can tell you to do. AVNation.tv. AVNation.tv. You will find this very program. We have a weekly one called AV Week. A few other helpful niche ones for the AV industry that are on monthly. We have a new AV Social coming down, which is our social media and marketing show. a live staging and event show, education-focused show, just a number of different ones. So check it out if you would. AVNation.tv. AVNation.tv. Thanks so much for listening. This has been A State of Control.